Have you ever experienced one of those coincidences so perfect, so laden with meaning, that it shook your perception of reality? A thought about a distant friend, and seconds later, they call you. A profound dilemma haunts you, and upon opening a random book, the exact answer leaps from the page. Or the same number, the same symbol, the same image, repeating in your life so insistently that it borders on the impossible. Carl Jung didn't call this chance. He called it synchronicity. This phenomenon is not a glitch in the matrix of the universe. It is the secret language of yourself, of the deepest and wisest center of your psyche, dialoguing directly with the fabric of reality. Synchronicity is the visible proof that your inner world and the outer world are not separate. They are a mirror of each other, connected by an invisible web of meaning. When you are aligned with your true journey, the universe begins to conspire in your favor, not in a magical way, but in a psychological one. It leaves clues, signs, confirmations. The great question is not whether the universe speaks to you, but whether you have learned to listen to this language. This is the best-kept secret of depth psychology. You carry within you a compass that, when activated, causes the very map of destiny to redraw itself before your eyes. What we are going to do here, together, is much more than a video. It is a ritual of activation. We will decode this language, step by step, topic by topic, until you not only understand, but begin to see these signs in your own life. For this journey to be complete and transformative, I need your total commitment. Therefore, if you have felt the call, if a part of you recognizes the truth in these words, make this a conscious act. Subscribe to the channel and activate all notifications, because each video will be a piece of your soul's puzzle. Leave your like not as a simple click, but as a signal to yourself that you are ready to begin this quest. And most importantly, comment now with the word totality to seal your commitment to this exploration, and so that I know who is truly on this journey with me. Now, prepare yourself. The descent begins. The journey begins with a subtle, almost inaudible sensation, a murmur coming from the depths of being. It is the pain of fragmentation. You feel it in the anxiety that tightens your chest for no apparent reason, in the existential void that no material achievement can fill, in the persistent feeling of being an actor, playing a role in your own life, rather than being its author. This feeling is not a sign of weakness or illness. It is the healthiest and most sacred manifestation of your psyche. It is the self, the organizing center of your psychic totality, calling the exiled parts of you back home. To understand this call, it is crucial to differentiate the ego from the self. The ego is the center of your consciousness, the I you believe yourself to be. It is the captain of the ship, responsible for daily maneuvers, for navigating in known waters. However, the ego is not the entire ship, much less the ocean. The self is the totality, the captain, the ship, the crew, even the mutinous sailors in the hold, the shadow, and the unfathomable ocean of the unconscious itself. Jung described it as the sun of our psychic system, while the ego is merely the earth, a planet that, in its arrogance, believes it is the center of the universe. The journey of individuation, the path to totality, is the process of correcting this cosmic perspective. The ego must learn to orbit the self, not the other way around. This call intensifies when the ego's life becomes sterile, when the old maps no longer serve, when the goals that once motivated you lose their shine. It is the self that is withdrawing psychic energy, libido, from external pursuits to force you into an internal one. Depression, the midlife crisis, the loss of meaning, all are instruments of the self to break the tyranny of the ego and begin the great work, the reunification of the personality. Accepting this call is the most courageous act a human being can perform. It means voluntarily leaving the safety of the known shore to navigate toward an inner continent that the ego's maps do not show, guided only by an internal compass that points to a true north that, at first, seems like madness. It is the transition from a life merely survived to a life laden with destiny and meaning. It is the beginning of your true story. No journey to the self can even begin without first crossing the threshold guarded by the most feared and misunderstood figure of our psyche, the shadow. The ego's first impulse, upon encountering the call to the depths, is to seek light, purity, elevation. But Jung, with his relentless wisdom, warns us the path to heaven invariably passes through hell. The shadow is not evil. It is, simply, everything that we have repressed and denied in ourselves to build the persona, our social mask. It is the repository of all instincts, emotions, and qualities that were considered unacceptable by our family, culture, and ourselves. Aggression, raw sexuality, envy, greed, but also wild creativity, childlike spontaneity, and assertive strength. All of this is banished to the dark basement of the unconscious. The problem is that the energy contained in these traits does not disappear. On the contrary, the more repressed it is, the more autonomous and destructive it becomes. The shadow, when unrecognized, does not belong to us. It possesses us. It manifests in our behavioral lapses, in uncontrolled outbursts of anger, in self-sabotage, in addictions, and in psychosomatic symptoms. It is the invisible force pulling the strings behind the stage of our consciousness, ensuring that we repeat the same tragic mistakes, attracting the same painful situations, without ever understanding why. The most common way to avoid a direct confrontation with the shadow is through the mechanism of projection. The ego, to maintain its immaculate self-image, takes all its negative qualities and projects them onto others. That which irritates, judges, and condemns you most in the outer world is, invariably, an aspect of your own unrecognized shadow. The enemy out there is a mirror of your own dark face. The work of integrating the shadow is, therefore, the dirty work of individuation. It requires the courage to withdraw our projections, to admit, this which I so hate in the other also lives in me. It is an exercise in radical humility and brutal honesty. It is not about unleashing the shadow and acting on its primitive impulses, but about bringing it into the light of consciousness, dialoguing with it, understanding its needs, and integrating its energy constructively. In doing so, a miracle happens. The lead of repression transforms into the gold of authenticity. The energy that was spent keeping the shadow chained is released and becomes available for life. You become more complete, more vital, more human. The shadow ceases to be a saboteur and becomes a source of power and depth. It is the guardian of the portal, because only one who has the courage to face their own darkness is worthy of accessing the light of the self. After passing through the first portal of the shadow, the traveler of the psyche encounters the next layer of the unconscious, where the archetypal figures of totality reside, anima and animus. These are not abstract concepts, but living psychic realities that govern our emotional and relational lives. Jung postulated that every human being carries within them a psychological counterpart to their biological sex. In a man, this inner feminine figure is the anima. In a woman, the inner masculine figure is the animus. The anima in a man represents not only his repressed feminine qualities such as sensitivity, intuition, the capacity for relatedness, and a connection to nature and art, but also functions as his bridge to the soul, the guide to the depths of the unconscious. A man unconscious of his anima lives disconnected from his own feelings. He projects her onto real women, seeking in them the goddess or soulmate who will complete him. This leads to relationships of dependency, idealizations, and subsequent bitter disillusionments, as no real woman can bear the weight of the projection of a man's soul. When a man begins to integrate his anima, he stops searching for the perfect woman out there and starts cultivating his own inner garden. He develops the capacity to relate to himself, to his feelings, and to his creativity. His life gains a new dimension of depth, meaning, and connection. Likewise, the animus in a woman represents not only her repressed masculine qualities such as logical thinking, assertiveness, courage, and the ability to structure the world, but also acts as her bridge to spirit and logos. A woman unconscious of her animus is possessed by it. She does not have her own opinions, but is dominated by a set of rigid, dogmatic, and often critical beliefs you should, one must, that she takes as absolute truth. She projects the animus onto men, seeking in them the authority, strength, or savior who will give her direction. By integrating the animus, a woman reclaims her own inner authority. She learns to use her mind creatively and assertively, to transform unconscious opinions into conscious convictions, and to manifest her ideas in the world with power and clarity. The dance between the conscious ego and these contrasexual figures is the core of relational life. The quest for totality requires that we stop projecting our anima or animus onto our partners and begin to build a conscious relationship with this inner force. It is the sacred inner marriage, the coniunctio of the alchemists, that allows us to experience external relationships not from a place of lack, but of wholeness. It is the union of opposites within us that makes us capable of truly loving the other in their totality. Delving even deeper into the exploration, beyond the personal shadow and the figures of the anima and animus, we find the most profound and universal stratum of the psyche, the collective unconscious. This is not a repository of repressed personal memories, but a psychic inheritance shared by all of humanity. It is the sediment of millions of years of human experience, an energetic field that contains the matrices of all life's possibilities. The structures that organize this field are the archetypes. An archetype is not a specific image, but a primordial pattern, an empty form that is filled with the content of our individual and cultural experience. They are like the invisible operating systems of the human soul. The hero, the great mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the divine child, the self-all are archetypes. They are the characters of the great drama of existence that live within each of us. On the journey of individuation, these archetypes function as compasses and maps. They are constellated, activated at different phases of our lives to guide us through the challenges inherent to each stage. The hero's journey, for example, is the archetype that activates when we need to leave the comfort of the known world family, security to face the dragons of the unknown, the challenges of adult life, our own shadow, and return with a treasure, a new consciousness, a stronger identity. When we feel lost, confused, and without direction, the archetype of the wise old man may emerge in dreams or synchronicities, offering an insight, an intuition that points the way. In moments of great despair, the divine child may manifest, bringing the promise of renewal, hope, and a new beginning. The danger lies in completely identifying with an archetype. This is what Jung called psychic inflation. A man who identifies with the hero archetype can become arrogant and reckless, unable to recognize his own vulnerability. A woman identified with the great mother can become suffocating and controlling, losing her own identity for the sake of others. The conscious work is to recognize which archetype is active in our psyche, honor its energy, learn its lesson, but without being possessed by it. It is a respectful dialogue with the inner gods. By understanding the language of archetypes, we gain a map to the often chaotic territory of our own soul. We cease to be passive victims of unconscious forces and become conscious co-creators of our journey. We begin to see that our small personal story is, in fact, a unique variation of an eternal and universal myth, and this perception connects us to something much larger than our small ego, aligning us with the great flow of life toward totality. At the heart of the journey to totality lies one of Jung's most revolutionary and mysterious concepts, synchronicity. He defined it as a causal connecting principle, or in simpler terms, a meaningful coincidence. It is the alignment between an inner psychic state, a thought, a dream, an emotion, and an outer event, which cannot be linked by a cause and effect relationship, but are united by a common meaning. Synchronicity is the moment when the veil between the inner and outer worlds becomes transparent, revealing that both are expressions of a single, underlying reality, orchestrated by the self. This phenomenon is not random. It tends to occur at times of great transformation, crises, or when we are deeply engaged in the journey of individuation. It is as if, by aligning ourselves with the purpose of the self, the universe itself begins to send us signs, confirmations, and guidance. It is the language through which the self assures us that we are on the right path, or warns us of a deviation. Think of the scientist who struggles with a problem for years and, in a dream, the image of a serpent biting its own tail, the Ouroboros, gives him the structure of the benzene ring. Or the person who, devastated by the end of a relationship, repeatedly encounters the symbol of a butterfly, reminding them of the power of transformation. These are not mere chances. They are archetypal events that erupt into everyday reality. The ego, with its causal and linear logic, struggles to understand synchronicity. It dismisses it as luck, coincidence, or magical thinking, but the soul recognizes it instantly. It feels the numinous, the quality of the sacred that accompanies these events. Synchronicity forces us to question our materialistic worldview and to consider the possibility that the psyche and matter are two aspects of the same unitary reality. The unused mundus of the alchemists. Cultivating the ability to perceive synchronicity is a spiritual practice. It requires mindfulness of our inner state and of the events in the outer world. It demands the humility to abandon the need to control and explain everything, and the courage to trust in the superior intelligence of the self. When we live in dialogue with the self, life ceases to be a series of random events and transforms into a continuous, meaningful conversation. The books that fall into our hands, the people we accidentally meet, the words we hear out of nowhere, everything becomes part of a great dialogue. Synchronicity is the experiential proof that we are not alone and lost in an indifferent universe. We are embedded in an intelligent and living cosmos that actively participates in our journey of return to totality. On the path of individuation, there is a subtle and dangerous trap, a mirage that can divert even the most sincere seeker, ego inflation. This phenomenon occurs when the ego, instead of humbly relating to the contents of the unconscious, appropriates and identifies with them. It is the moment when the ship's captain, after glimpsing the power of the ocean, believes himself to be Poseidon. Inflation can manifest into main forms, positive or negative. In positive inflation, the ego identifies with a luminous archetypal figure. It could be the archetype of the sage, the healer, the savior, or the hero. The person begins to feel special, enlightened, superior to ordinary mortals. They might become a self-proclaimed guru, a charismatic leader, or simply someone who believes they have all the answers. The danger here is that the ego, inflated with the power of the archetype, loses touch with its own humanity, with its shadow. It becomes dogmatic, intolerant, and paradoxically, completely unconscious. It is the Icarus syndrome, who, by flying too close to the sun with his wax wings, plummets into the sea. On the other hand, negative inflation occurs when the ego identifies with the shadow or a destructive archetype. The person feels chronically guilty, useless, evil, or a victim of fate. It is a kind of grandiosity in reverse. The person feels they are the worst of all, which is still a way of placing oneself at the center of the universe, albeit in a negative way. Both forms of inflation are a short circuit in the process of individuation. They prevent true integration, which is a dialectical process, a constant tension between opposites. The healthy ego identifies with neither the light nor the shadow, but learns to be the container for both. It develops the capacity to say, I am not the savior, but the energy of the savior can flow through me. I am not my anger, but I can feel anger and use it consciously. The cure for inflation is grounding in concrete reality and humility. It is manual labor, taking care of mundane tasks, recognizing one's own limitations, and above all, having a sense of humor about oneself. It is constantly remembering that we are only human, earthen vessels that may at times contain a divine treasure, but which remain fragile and fallible. The goal of individuation is not to make the ego divine, but to make it more human, more conscious, and more capable of serving as a respectful and functional partner to the self. True greatness lies not in becoming a god, but in becoming a complete human being. When consciousness sleeps, the deep psyche awakens. Dreams are the nocturnal theater where the unconscious stages its dramas, reveals its secrets, and sends us direct messages from the self. For Jung, dreams are not mere residues of daily life or infantile wish fulfillments, as they were for Freud. They are a natural and essential phenomenon, a self-regulating system of the psyche that constantly seeks balance and totality. The dream is the voice of nature within us, attempting to compensate for the one-sidedness of our conscious attitude. If during the day we are excessively rational, our dreams will bring images laden with emotion and instinct. If we live in a very extroverted and superficial way, our dreams will drag us into deep, interior landscapes. They are the mirror that shows us the face we do not see when we are awake. The language of dreams is not logical, but symbolic. A symbol, for Jung, is not a simple sign that points to something known. It is the best possible expression for something that is still unknown, a complex reality that the rational mind cannot grasp. Therefore, decoding a dream is not like consulting a dictionary. Dreaming of a snake does not universally mean betrayal. For one person, it might represent the healing instinct, the rod of Asclepius; for another, a threat from the shadow; for a third, the awakening Kundalini energy. Interpretation requires an amplification of the symbol, connecting it with mythology, culture, and, most importantly, with the dreamer's personal associations and life context. Working with dreams is one of the pillars of the individuation journey. Keeping a dream journal and dedicating oneself to dialoguing with their images opens a direct channel of communication with the self. It's like learning a foreign language at first. It seems confusing and nonsensical, but with practice and dedication, patterns begin to emerge. Recurring figures, repeating scenarios, intense emotions, all are clues. The dream shows us where we are stuck, which aspect of our shadow needs attention, how our relationship with the anima or animus is, and what the next step in our development is. It is the self acting as our inner therapist and guide. To ignore dreams is like ignoring letters sent by our best friend and wisest counselor. It is to close ourselves off from the source of wisdom that continuously springs from our own center. By honoring dreams, we honor the totality of our psyche and open ourselves to a guidance that far transcends the limited capacity of our ego. The process of individuation is not a linear path but a spiral movement, marked by periods of tension and conflict. This is when the conscious attitude of the ego clashes head-on with the demands of the unconscious. We may feel paralyzed, torn between two opposite paths, with no logical solution in sight. It is at this point of maximum tension that a third way can emerge, a path that is neither one nor the other, but a synthesis that transcends both. Jung called this natural capacity of the psyche to create a new, unifying solution the transcendent function. It is the inner alchemical process that unites the opposites. Imagine a conflict. The conscious ego wants the security of a stable job, but the unconscious, through dreams and symptoms, cries out for a life of creativity and risk. Logic dictates that one must choose one or the other. Repressing one side will lead to neurosis. The conflict becomes unbearable. If the individual can endure this tension without yielding to the impulse to make a premature decision, something new can be born. The transcendent function manifests through a symbol. It could be an image in a dream, a sudden idea, an active fantasy, or a synchronicity. This symbol is not a rational solution, but it carries the energy of both poles of the conflict and unites them at a new level of understanding. In the example given, the symbol might be the image of building a bridge. The person then realizes they do not need to quit their job immediately, nor repress their creative side. They can start to build a bridge, an evening course, a side project, a planned savings account that will gradually lead them from the shore of security to the shore of creativity. The solution was not a choice between A and B, but the creation of a C that contains and transcends both. The activation of the transcendent function requires certain conditions. First, the courage to face the conflict and the energy it generates. Second, the ability to give form to that energy, whether through writing, painting, dancing, active imagination, or any other symbolic expression. It is the act of making concrete what is emerging from the unconscious. Third, the willingness to integrate the new insight and act upon it in real life. This is the engine of psychic development. Each time the transcendent function is activated, the personality expands. The bridge between the conscious and the unconscious is strengthened. The ego becomes more flexible and resilient, and consciousness moves a little closer to the totality of the self. It is proof that, at the heart of every unbearable conflict, lies the seed of a new and broader consciousness. The quest for totality is not an esoteric exercise restricted to spiritual retreats or therapy sessions. The self is constantly communicating with us, not just in the grand dramas of life, but in the subtle details of the everyday. Learning to recognize these signs is to transform life from a profane routine into a sacred pilgrimage. The chaos of modern life, with its flood of information and stimuli, is designed to keep our attention on the surface, fully captured by the ego. The self, however, speaks in a quieter language. One of its most common signs is the feeling of being in the flow. These are the moments when actions seem to happen effortlessly, where time becomes distorted, and there is a sense of deep connection and purpose in what one is doing, whether it's painting a picture, solving a complex problem, or simply tending a garden. In these moments, the ego steps back, and the self takes the lead. Another sign is irrational attractions. That sudden, inexplicable urge to read a particular book, visit an unknown place, learn a new skill, or talk to a stranger. The ego may dismiss this as a whim, but it is often the self pointing to a piece of information or an experience that is crucial for our next step in development. They are invitations to step off the beaten path. Physical symptoms and annoying coincidences are also messengers. The headache that always appears when you are about to do something that goes against your nature. The flat tire on the very day you were going to a job interview that your soul rejects. The object that disappears and reappears. The psyche, when not heard, speaks through the body and through matter. These are ways for the unconscious to say stop, look, reconsider. The quality of our relationships is also a barometer. Relationships that energize us, that allow us to be authentic, and that challenge us to grow are a sign of alignment with the self. Relationships that drain us, that require the constant use of a mask, and that keep us stuck in repetitive patterns are a sign that we are living from a complex or an ego demand. Recognizing these signs requires the practice of silence and self-observation. It is necessary to create small pauses in the day to ask oneself, how am I feeling right now? What is my body saying? What is attracting my attention for no logical reason? It is a process of tuning our inner radio, adjusting the dial beyond the noise of the ego, seeking the subtler, constant frequency of the self. In doing so, we realize that guidance was never absent. We were just too distracted to notice. The journey of individuation, the quest for the totality of the self, may seem at first glance to be a profoundly individualistic and self-centered path. However, this is the greatest of illusions. The final paradox of Jung's work is that the most radically individual act, that of becoming who you truly are, is also the act of greatest service to the collective. A person living from the ego is, for the most part, unconscious of their shadow and projects it massively onto the world. They seek power, validation, and security at the expense of others and the planet. Their actions are reactive, based on unresolved complexes and unconscious fears. They are part of the problem of collective neurosis, polarization, and destruction. A society composed of unindividuated individuals is a sick society, doomed to repeat the same historical mistakes, to seek scapegoats, and to blindly follow charismatic leaders who personify their unintegrated archetypes. Conversely, a person who walks the path of individuation is engaged in a continuous process of withdrawing their projections. By integrating their shadow, they stop creating enemies out there. By relating to their anima or animus, they become capable of having mature and authentic relationships. By connecting with the self, they find a source of ethics and purpose that does not depend on external dogmas, but on an unshakable inner authority. Their actions become conscious, born not of reaction, but of integrity. They no longer need to save the world, because they have stopped projecting onto the world the need for salvation that belonged to themselves. Instead, they become a center of consciousness and sanity. Their mere presence has a healing effect on their environment and the people around them. They become what Jung called a mana personality, someone who carries a natural authority and an energy that inspires others to seek their own totality, not by preaching, but by example. The legacy of individuation, therefore, is not the construction of an external monument, but the embodiment of a broader consciousness. Each individual who becomes whole adds a point of light to the collective consciousness of humanity. It is the only revolution that truly matters, the inner revolution. As Jung said, the world hangs by a thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. By healing ourselves, we offer the world the only contribution that is truly in our power, a human being who is a little more conscious and a little more whole, and that, in the end, is what can make all the difference.